First of all, thank you very much, Kathi, for providing the Zoom link for today's Coffee with God and for hosting it now and looking after everybody who's coming in. And EJ and I collaborate together with Mystic Matters and Coffee with God. Thank you for this wonderful online sharing of our offerings that we do together and separately. And then thank you to Elizabeth, Mark, and Larry for the conversation today. I don't need to introduce them to you because all of you here know them, and the information was on the invite anyway. So over to Larry to get started.
Great, thank you, and greetings to you all. I am just hope that my role will be to stimulate conversation after Mark and Elizabeth have given their presentations. Elizabeth will go first for about 5 minutes, and then Mark will speak, and then Elizabeth will follow up with a theological reflection. So it's very much the hermeneutical circle of experience and understanding experience and interpreting it in the light of faith. And my interest, of course, as many of you know, I've had a 50-year relationship with Cyril Axelrod, a deaf-blind confrere of mine in the Redemptorists. And I would say, knowing Cyril and his disability, and his ministry within that disability, and the challenges he has faced, and the discrimination he has faced within the church, I would say this is a conversation long overdue. And I think that we are going to benefit greatly by it. I hope it is a kind of a conscientization of us, although, as I said, in some of our preliminary discussions, in some ways we're speaking to the converted. I think we are all here at this meeting because we have strong feelings in this regard, but it's something that we need to expand and to widen the scope of this discussion. So without further ado, Elizabeth, speak to us a little bit about your experience before we hand over to Mark.
Thank you. I must say, precede all my remarks by saying that my internet keeps saying it's unstable. So if I disappear, I'll hand it over to Mark. So greetings, everyone. I will give you just a very brief background of myself, which I think most of you are familiar with. But okay, so I had polio when I was 5 years old. It was just a few months before the vaccination came out. And then I have lived with that for most of my life. I use crutches and a leg brace. And in regards to the church and my experiences there, mostly, very fortunately, I have not met with a lot of obstacles that many other people have met with. But I will share a couple of experiences with you. Now, as I'm aging, you might say, and with post-polio syndrome, I find it more and more difficult to go into a church because of the pews. Many of the churches were constructed or are old constructions, and before the consciousness of disability. And so I do find it more difficult, and sometimes there are stairs without ramps or ramps that are very steep. And so these are things I have to watch out for more as I grow older, actually. Okay, I'd like to share with you an experience I had a few years ago which was a mixed experience. And at the local church, I felt called to be a Eucharistic minister. And I wanted to give communion to people who were ill, people in hospitals, people in homes for the aged. And I also realized that being a minister means giving out communion, handing out communion in church. I knew I couldn't do that because I couldn't stand. So I went to the priest and I explained my situation. And immediately he said to me, I want you on the altar. And I said, well, I think it's going to be difficult. And he said, we'll make a plan. And he did. And with his encouragement and creativity and innovation, I sat, and other ministers came and helped me, gave me the plate with hosts, and I dispensed the communion as the other ministers did. And I was so touched because many people came up afterwards and remarked that it was a special way of receiving communion, and they really appreciated that I was able to do that. But then one man in the church came up to me at one point and said, does the priest know you're doing this? As if I would just go up and do this on my own without a collaboration. And he was very, well, I think he came from a very traditional way of doing liturgy. And I think that him experiencing something different was a real shock to him. So I would just say that people with a disability who are going to participate in liturgy in a different way, either communicate differently or their more mobility is different, that we can expect that some people will have doubts. Some people will judge. Some people will even be offended by such actions. But I was very fortunate myself to be able to participate in this ministry. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Mark, who's going to talk about his ministry and his experiences.
Thank you very much for this invitation to speak with you all today. I was very intrigued by the question that we eventually chose, why the church needs people with disabilities. And I myself am working with the deaf community in Swaziland at the moment, but I have worked in Johannesburg and also coordinate activities with the deaf in South Africa, Lesotho, and Swaziland. And one of the challenges, well, the way that I came to understand this question and to answer it was, from my experience, it was really so that myself in particular could undergo a conversion experience. Because being able-bodied and being hearing, I realized I grew up with a lot of assumptions. And working with the deaf community has challenged me in many respects with regards to those assumptions. And it's helped me understand more fundamentally what we talk about as metanoia, that radical change of mind and heart that we need as Christians. And when I started out, I had grandparents who were deaf, and because I could communicate with my grandfather, I thought when I started out, it wouldn't take me too long to communicate with other deaf people. Until I started discovering the intricacies of sign language, and the fact that sign language is very regionally based, depends very much on which school you went to. When I started, I was working primarily with people who had been to St. Vincent School for the Deaf. and they were mostly from the white community. And their signing was very different from the deaf Catholics that I worked with in Soweto, never mind Cape Town or Durban. There were some of the signs that varied from place to place. And even now that I'm in Swaziland, I've had to familiarize myself with a very different number of signs. And now I would say that I'm more proficient in Swazi sign than I am in South African sign, but it doesn't take long to adapt, because just increase your vocabulary.
Well, let me just pick up there and fill the gap if Mark isn't back with us. In terms of Cyril Axelrod, he, of course, being deaf, grew up learning sign language and lip reading, and he too experienced the massive diversity of challenge in sign language, from South African to international, when he went to China, and how he had to learn a completely different sign language. And of course, simultaneously learning to read and write and speak Cantonese. And I'll never forget the Sunday that we had the story of the woman at the well, that very long gospel from John chapter 4. On Saturday night, Cyril, that he could still see, with the Cantonese lectionary open in front of him, and the Chinese characters going from the top down. They were in length columns with Chinese characters. You can read them anyway, up or down or left or right. You can still make sense of them, unlike us, where obviously letters have to follow a sequence. And there was Cyril in his room practicing the sign and the the vocalization of the Chinese, the Cantonese language gospel of the woman at the well. And I have to make a big mea culpa, because I've always seen Cyril as somebody you take with a big pinch of salt. He tends to exaggerate things, and he would tell me how proficient he was in Chinese, that he had now learned 4,000 characters. And I said, oh yes, Cyril, you know, with a pinch of salt, Cyril, until I got there and saw it for myself. But here was a very interesting that happened. He started the social service for the deaf, and where in that culture, disability is completely swept under the carpet. You don't go public with it. If you have a disabled child, that child is kept locked away. So he had a lot of work to do to conscientize and help people with disability. One day, there were parents with a little child, and they were talking to him about their situation. And Cyril pushed a pen off the desk, and it fell on the floor, and the little child looked at it. And Cyril said to the parents, oh, your child can hear. Oh, they said, no, he's deaf like us. He's deaf like us. And Cyril realized there and then the problem of denial, and that he had to help them to come to terms with the fact that their child was a hearing person, unlike both parents who were deaf. So there are all of these dynamics that are involved. But Elizabeth, I think we must hand over to you now. We can't get Mark yet. And I know you've got some very important theological reflections to share with us, so that we could perhaps get going with a conversation.
Good, thank you. So I'm going to screen share a PowerPoint. I thought I would start by giving a little bit of background on the theology of disability, which tries to position people with disability in religious communities. So I want to talk first about contextual theology. I think probably most of you are aware of what this is. It's in theology within political, social, economic, and cultural realms, along with tradition and scripture. In other words, this theology comes from the people, comes from people on the ground, persons who have been and continue to be marginalized in religious groups are beginning to make their voices heard. They contribute by voicing their unique experiences, asserting their right to be included in church and religious services, and the need to include their perspective in decision-making. And we have a very good example of this in the Catholic Church right now, with Pope Francis having called a synod. He wanted to hear voices from the people, and over several months now, maybe a couple of years, little groups all over the world have been gathering to talk about issues in the church which have been ignored or neglected. And as it progressed, it went to diocesan level, went to regional level, went to different continents, and then gathered in Rome not long ago, in October, in fact, and people identifying issues and talking with each other. And this is an example of contextual theology in the making. So contextual theology covers many, many different kinds of theologies, orientations. I just want to point out a few ones that we're probably familiar with. Liberation theology, which emphasizes economic, political, and social issues. And of course, these affect the images of God. Feminist theology, which covers issues of women, sexism, gender equality, and body issues, also has an influence on how we think of and our idea of God. African theology, which covers cultural, social, gender issues, also affects images of God, as does environmental theology, focusing on climate change and care for the earth, again, promoted by Pope Francis. All of this affects images of how we think of God. And today we'll focus on disability theology, which addresses ableism, diversity of psychological, intellectual, and human embodiment issues, which affects images of God. And what I focus now on just two aspects of theology of disability for our conversation today. What is unique about this contextual theology? I'm going to speak a few words about the limits model as proposed by disability theologian Deborah Kramer, and also images of God and how this has been affected. So the limits model attends to the fluidity of human embodiment. Limits are an unsurprising aspect of being human. We all experience limits in some way or form. Limits are normal. And according to the limits model, they are not seen as deficits, but they can lead us towards creativity and even toward God. First is we can consider the physical conditions and norms that are set by society. If we're talking about people with disability, we are measured by a concept called normality. Normality is our bodies which are defined, measured, and valued against a standard set by a dominant group, ableism. Able-bodied, strong, beautiful, young, healthy, not being vulnerable, heterosexual, employed, self-sufficient, financially. Normality creates a duality. Limitation as a universal characteristic for everyone should open us to the beauty and richness of diversity. The limit model opens us to see limitation which do not fit in to what is normal as, again, as a creative, an asset, an opportunity, and not as a deficit, as a way towards God. It challenges binary, dualistic thinking. You either fall into normal body or you are disabled. And the limits model says, no, we are on a continuum. For example, the us and them, able-bodied versus disabled-bodied, strong versus vulnerable. But our condition, our embodiment is fluid. As we know, sometimes we are ill and we feel we can't perform. We are, maybe we break an arm and then we return to how we feel and being able to function. This model, it challenges the cultural pressure of perfection. It bursts the bubble of an inflated self-concept. It challenges illusions about ourselves. The idea that we can handle your own problems. I should be able to figure it out myself. I don't need help. This is a cultural moray that we try to live up to under normality. But as Kramer says, if each of us live long enough, we will become disabled. Coming to terms with limitation in the form of physical disability means dealing with struggles, outside barriers, for example, or from within oneself, one's identity, feelings of hopelessness, even despair at times. It often means overcoming adverse conditions of lack of support from others and feelings of inferiority or failure, just to name a few struggles. Here's what some peoples with disability have said about handling their struggles. One woman said, by limb, by prosthesis, after having lost a leg, became the metaphor, a form of emotional education. It teaches me a lot of things. Another woman, my disability has created the conditions for me to seek deeply. I've had time to dig deep. I've sought a way to make my life worthwhile. Another person said, I have capacities that I haven't used. This is after she became disabled. Capacities, strengths that are being called on. I am really functioning well. Do anything. This is the kind of my life. This is my life. But I know ultimately released. And this is what is meant by human embodiment is fluid, because sometimes we are feeling up to par and sometimes not. For this last woman, she had chronic fatigue syndrome. And that is what we would call an invisible disability. You can't see it. And sometimes people really wonder if it's real, but it is real. but she keeps coming back to, I know that God would want my life force to be released. And now we turn to the other aspect, the images of God. How the images of God evolved for some people in coming to terms with disability. One woman pleaded with God to fix the limitation of her amputated leg, to fix the physical and the psychological pain. God was a fixer. And it was after she had acceptance of the loss of her leg and her career plans crushed that she was led to study theology and search for meaning of her disability and image of God. She finally came to an image of God. I cannot think God out. I cannot. She then embraced God as mystery. Disability was redefined as disconnection. Another woman was taught and believed God was absolute good. She was told her disability would not be associated with God, all good. Her partial vision, which was evil, had come from the devil. In fact, as a Christian, she was that she had a disability. She was told her disability was a real. She suffered greatly. This image of God is dualistic. A God image emerged as one of paradox, and who calls those with limitations can express feelings of ambivalence or ups and downs regarding their disability. Likewise, images of God are God as a fixer, can move to a God of creative cooperation. God is mystery. As a judge, the disabled God is proposed by Nancy Iceland. In the resurrected Jesus Christ, they saw not the suffering servant, for whom the last and most important word was tragedy and sin, but the disabled God who embodied both impaired hands and feet and pierced side in the Imago Dei. Paradoxically, in the very act commonly understood as the transcendent of physical life, God is revealed as tangible, bearing the representation of the body reshaped by injustice and sin into the fullness of Godhead. The disabled God embodies the ability to see clearly the complexity and the mixed blessing of life and bodies without living in despair. The church needs persons with disability. The disability can function as a catalyst to enter the interior world to search for meaning of life and meaning of images of God. Disability experiences overcoming adversity, coming to terms with limitations can facilitate preparation for showing compassion and developing skills for their chosen ministry. Their gifts are needed in religious communities. Persons with disabilities are models for being agents for change within the church. Inclusivity of diversity, images of God, embodying paradox, vulnerability, and solidarity. Again, if each of us live long enough, we will become disabled.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
I would just open it up for conversation or comments or whatever.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. And if we can follow the same hermeneutical circle that you and Mark set us on track with, that let us listen at the experience level now from everyone. And then together we'll move on to a theological reflection, just as you have done in your presentation. So first of all, let me open it to others to share about their experience, possible experience of this reality in their lives, in their ministries, or whatever. Would anyone like to share on that level.
Can I share?
Yeah, you can go.
Oh, I thought of the experiences I've had in my own life with people who are close to me with disabilities. Obviously, Cyril is a big one. But I suddenly remembered when you were talking about the lady who had lost her leg.
Yes.
One of my daughter's closest friends moved over to England and got very sick. And after many months, they decided to cut her leg off below her knee. And she's the most beautiful, beautiful woman now. They are 33. And we were totally devastated. And yet, Adrian, who's also from a Catholic family in Durban, was the one who had the strength and held everybody else's pain together. She was the one who found a new Adrian. Obviously, she must have had some therapy, and all her friends put money together to get a really nice prosthesis. She wears shorts and she goes swimming and does everything. So I just remember very clearly she held everybody together. And she was the one who became disabled.
Profound. Anyone else want
And
to
do you
share?
think that she had an impact?
Yes, a huge impact, because we all were talking about it. Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. My connection, it still says it's unstable, so I might disappear again. But I'm wondering how you think you changed because your perspective changed.
Did you say, how do I think my perspective changed?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, suddenly the word differently abled became more important than disabled. Anthea.
Hello, can you hear me, Bonnie?
Yes.
Okay. I'll just add on to what you've just said, and I don't have a lot of input on this person. She is the girlfriend of our youngest son in San Diego. We met Alicia. She's a Mexican woman when we were there recently visiting. Has a single mother with two teenage daughters. I'll just cut the story short and say that Alicia, 5 months ago now, went back to Mexico for her dad's birthday celebration. There was a terrible car accident and her mum was killed, but Alicia, her right arm was amputated just below the elbow. She's a nurse and has also been in the military. So it's a devastating life change for her. And my experience, what I've seen of this woman whom I only met when we were there, is also so positive in that she, I believe, is, as you said, not disabled, but other abled. She's so forward looking. She gives so much credit and kudos to our son for the friend that he is to her, for the support. And I think for Kevin, this has been a life-changing experience also, to observe her, just how she is in the face of what she's dealing with. I can't say more than that, except that she has a strong spirituality. She is in a Pentecostal church, which Kevin definitely is not. Does not practice any religion. And so that's my input on that. It's just been quite a I don't know how to say, enriching on a certain level for our family, for my husband, myself, our kids, other kids in San Diego, our grandchildren, to spend time with this woman and see the impact that she has on people's lives.
Indeed. Thank you, Andrea. Anne Wigley, can you unmute yourself, Anne? Unmute. There we go.
Yes, I just would like to share a little bit of my own experience of disability, and I liked very much, Elizabeth, that we're all on a continuum as regards disability. There's mental disability, emotional disability. And I have a brother who has, my elder brother, he was 18 months older than me, severe, fairly serious psychological difficulty. He couldn't cope at school at all. I think he was expelled 4 times from school. And once, when we were sent to boarding school in Mouton for a year, I was 9. Hated it in the beginning, but I loved it afterwards. And at the end of the year, they expelled both my brothers. And they said to me, you can stay, but not your brothers. I said nothing, but I felt deeply offended. And I thought to myself, you don't want my brothers, you won't have me. And that has been being with him. He was expelled again much later when he was in standard 8. We landed in the same, even in my first day in school, nearly my first year in school, he was in sub B and I was in sub A, the same class. And the teacher asked him something and he couldn't answer. So she asked me and I could. But I cried because I didn't want to answer. I didn't want to know what he didn't know, because he had taught me to read when he came home, before I went to school. So it gave me a deep understanding of psychological disturbance of somebody whom I really loved and still do. He has died now. And, but that's another disability, and in the church, and how the church, both the schools three of the schools he was expelled from were run by religious. And a big misunderstanding and not understanding either his needs or my parents' needs, the way it was done. So I think that's another place we need. Church needs understanding who's the church, we the church. But it's been enriching for me and helped me to understand other people who struggle like he struggled all his life. I spent the last day of his life with him, and he was still very, very disturbed at the end of his life. He had good, endearing, loving qualities. He enjoyed life. He enjoyed nature. There were lots of things he enjoyed, but socially he couldn't cope. And so there was no place for him in the Catholic schools situation, actually, let alone other schools. So I just wanted to share that is my experience, a different kind of disability for which there was no place for that person.
Trish, I see your
Thank
hand
you.
up.
Yes, I would like to say that at the end of the 1970s, for several years, I taught at St. Vincent's School for the Deaf. I was not trained for teaching the deaf, and I must admit that when I first got to that school, I saw them all as people with disabilities. I was given a class of young men. They were not boys. They were 20, 22, 23. The oldest one was actually 25. They'd been at St. Vincent's all their lives, and their parents didn't know what to do with them because they were not only deaf, but they were all mentally retarded. And when I started, that was how I saw them. But I was given this class of 7 boys and told just to occupy them. They were not able, because of their mental deficiency, they were not able to do matric or anywhere near it. And they taught me sign language, but they taught me much more. I began to see them as persons. The disability didn't affect me as it had in the beginning. I saw them as normal, if you like, and I got to know them and to love them. And it was a wonderful experience for me because, in fact, when I left, some of them used to write to me, and one of them, who lives in Australia and now is the chaplain for deaf people in that town, and he still writes to me. They changed my whole perspective of disability. And these young men were doubly disabled because of their deafness and their mental retardation. But I managed to start communicating with them in a way that changed me and changed my whole perception of disability, for which I'm extremely grateful. So that although I was very nervous to go to St. Vincent's and teach the deaf without training for the deaf, they had such an impact on me that my understanding of disability and my looking at people and working with people who are disabled changed completely to a much more normal, wonderful thing. And Cyril Axelrod was the chaplain at the time, and it was wonderful to have him come into the class and talk to the students with sign language, of course. And he was lovely to me. I really love him, and I love to hear about him from you, Larry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Trish, for sharing personal experience. I wonder if we can't move on now to do some theological reflection, philosophical reflection, even picking up on your point, Elizabeth. If you live long enough, you'll know a thing or two about disability. So I don't know if anyone would like to chip in at this point about various aspects of a pastoral, theological, spiritual reflection on why disability is needed in the church, why we celebrate it, as Cyril Axelrod himself would say, as a gift from God. He's told so many people that, even when he got the OBE from Queen Elizabeth, my disability is a gift from God. So let's talk about God and disability. Picking up on your wonderful points there, Elizabeth, if anyone would like to respond in any way there. Do I see any hands up?
Marissa.
Can you hear me? Yeah, can you hear me? Okay.
There.
Yeah, what I'd like to pick up on is just what Elizabeth was just saying, that perception of God as fixer. I find that you know, and that experience of that if there is any disability or any imperfection, that it's a reflection of punishment, or, you know, that there's something wrong with you. I think those are two, yeah, you know, if I can just think of it in my own experience, I think that those were perceptions that I kind of grew up as, you know, I just took them as quite normal. And you know, and I know that, you know, some exposure to Pentecostal churches as well, where it was along the lines of, you know, that everything can be fixed, implying that there was something wrong. And so I just loved your presentation, Elizabeth, because I think that it puts things into a lot more perspective, and also the other sharing, which just does highlight the fact of that there is a gift in the disability, because it shakes this perception of a very almost like narrow perception of God. Yeah.
Can I pick up there and ask Elizabeth herself to tell us about something of the other Elizabeth that she has worked with, Elizabeth Johnson, and why I want to pick up on a happy fault, the common typo we all make of the difference between the word affect and effect. And in your theological reflection, you spoke about how different contexts effect our image of God. Now, I don't know if you meant to say how the context we come from has an effect on how we see God, because it's coming from where I'm coming from, or if it is effect, which means that it somehow creates an evolution of new images of God. So you see what I mean? So please speak to that, and perhaps talk about Elizabeth Johnson and her images of God, and how this has helped you in your own theological reflection on this question.
Okay, as far as the effects and affects, I think it's both and. You know, I think that, for example, the research I've done, and even in my own personal journey, having to meet limitations or difficult situations where, you know, fortunately in my life, I haven't had a lot of physical pain, but I've had some mental obstacles to get over. You know, can I really do this? And so on. And so, you know, I've had a lot of discussions with God about why me, or can you help me? Can you? Okay, so it does affect my relationship with God, because I think it's brought me closer, because in my struggle with trying to understand what are these obstacles, how to overcome them, or how to deal with them, or find meaning in these obstacles, it definitely has, I think, has made me have a closer relationship with God. God certainly has heard my anger and heard my plead for help. And he doesn't fix anything. She doesn't fix anything. But I know that God is with me. And I also think that it affects an evolution of who God is. Yeah, I mean, certainly just growing up, my image of God as a child certainly has changed. But I do think that my image of God changes. It evolves. It becomes more, I don't even have an image of God anymore in terms of a pictorial image. It's more of a presence. It is a sense that that I'm not alone, and I was somehow called to this, and this is my destiny, and this is my cross, if you want to say. I don't know if that answers what you were referring to. As far as Elizabeth Johnson, her focus is on feminist theology. And I keep coming back to her question, what is the best way to speak about God? And in her books, which I've read most of them, I think, she has always expanded and said that our images of God, we can always challenge them. We always challenge what has been taught us. And we go back to a personal experience and we say, who is God for me now? Who is God for me? How do I experience God? And sometimes my experience of God is nothing. It seems like an emptiness. And yet if I keep in this relationship, it evolves. And she's had a great influence on me in terms of opening up for everyone to question, is God he, she? Who is God? God is a mystery. So those are some of my thoughts, but maybe others have more to say.
Thank you. Anyone else like to share on a faith level as we try to cast the light of faith upon this experience of disability in discipleship? Anybody like to venture a theological reflection?
Pope Francis has done.
Who?
Erna?
Who's Erna? You got your hand up, Erna.
Yes. Good
Go for
afternoon.
it.
Yeah,
Go
sorry,
for it.
my camera goes off all the time. I also have unstable connection here. I hope you hear me okay.
Yeah.
I work in churches to raise awareness for the inclusion and the participation of persons with disabilities, and just off the cuff, to answer the question or my response as I'm sitting here after doing this work now for more than 10 years. If you ask me why do the church need persons with disability, then I would say because the church needs to understand better and get to know the unconditional God. God accepts and includes people unconditionally, and whether we have disabilities, intellectual or physical or whatever, God is so unconditional. including people and giving them a space and a voice to the rest of the world. Furthermore, I think having people with disabilities in churches reminds us that we live in a broken world. We have to deal with that. The challenges of a broken world. For that, we need the support of the community of believers, and therefore I feel it is so important that persons with disabilities have a place and a voice in churches. So thank you. Just a few
wonderful
thoughts.
Wonderful. That was really very touching. Thank you so much, Erna, and that wonderful work that you have done of conscientization. And that's one of the thoughts that we had earlier, that this would be important for us to raise awareness. Anyone got a hand up or would like to speak?
Sybil.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't see. Oh, there you are.
Yes.
Sorry.
I think having people living with a disability, and also, actually, if you look at it, I'm sure each one of us has, in one way or another, whether it's emotional, mental, or so what is normal. And I would say having more of a perspective like that, it helps to keep us human, not escaping into like the split between spirit and matter. I feel it helps to keep us all embodied, grounded, and living the incarnation. So I think we do well all together, not as like splitting.
Wasn't that the very thesis of Henry Nouwen towards the end of his life, that great spiritual writer Henry Nouwen, and
Yes.
how he spent the last part of his life in a L'Arche community, and there discovered that people with disability helped him, first of all, to stop denying that he himself had disabilities, and to name his own emotional and psychological disability, which he had denied all his life. And his thesis then, as you have just said, that all of us have disability in one form or another. I'd like to perhaps pick up on again, a theological reflection using Elizabeth's concept of limitation. What about saying something about God's limitations? Can we speak of a God of limitation? I'm throwing that out. If anybody would like to perhaps respond to that.
Yeah, I have heard others in dealing with, disability or other maybe traumas in their life. Is God powerless?
That's it. And you see, that's what Sybil said. It's all related to incarnation. And the incarnation of God in Christ was kenosis, self-emptying, and therefore very much limitation. And my great mystical heroine in life is Etty Hillesum. And there she was faced with the Holocaust. And this incredible moment when she realizes, God, I've come to realize you cannot help us. You cannot help us. So we've got to help you to guard that piece of you that's still within us as we continue to face this crisis. And maybe that's the God that that Etty speaks of, the God of limitation, who nevertheless remains in every human being created in God's very own image. To guard that absolute certainty that God is within, not just me, but everyone. So to me, it's a God of limitation, but God saying, well, we're in this together, darling. We're friends, we're partners in all of this.
Yes, I think it moves. You're expressing that it moves from a God as being a fixer to God in solidarity, a God of participation. Yeah. Sorry, Sybil, I interrupted you.
No. I mean, it's the
Sybil,
same.
you've got your hand up again.
Yeah, that. Well, we have to remember on the cross, Jesus had to bear that side of his humanity. God didn't fix for him either. And so that's what we experience.
Yeah. Elizabeth.
I'd like to pick up something that Anne said, which we haven't brought up yet, and that is that she had a brother who was disabled, yes, Anne, and yet how it affected her as a sibling, and how it affects, the family members, and how it affects, people around, people who care, about that person with a disability. And I just want to acknowledge that is a very important part of thinking about disability. And I appreciate Anne sharing that.
Yeah, I also was very touched and moved by what Anne had to say about her experience and her brothers. I found it, listening to that, made my heart very sad, very sore. And then I just wondered, but now I think I've got the answer. God's with us in everything, all our disabilities, physical or mental and emotional and spiritual. We have spiritual pain too.
Another point I would like to raise is the question of solidarity and the idea that everyone has disability, whether they like to admit it or not, but that the solidarity of the experience of oppression, discrimination, and we're seeing that very much more in the times in which we live, the interconnection of understanding of discrimination. And I want to tell a story about this, because Cyril Axelrod moved over eventually to London, when he became blind, and got quite involved in the ministry of the Archdiocese of Westminster. And it was the Chrism Mass at Westminster Cathedral, and he went along with his guide as a priest, serving the deaf-blind community of the diocese. And he vested and lined up for the procession of the presbyters with the cardinal at the time, Murphy O'Connor. And at one point, the MC came up to Cyril and pulled him out of the queue, out of the procession that was lining up, and said, no, you must go and sit with your people, with the deaf and the sign language people. And he was very hurt and upset, and off he went and sat with them. And afterwards, he queried it, and he said that he felt greatly offended at having been discriminated against, that he is also an ordained priest and had every right to be on the sanctuary with the priests for the Chrism Mass. And he was told the reason you were pulled out of the procession is because your guide is a woman. And we can't have a woman on the sanctuary at the Chrism Mass of the priesthood. So there was this double conundrum of physical disability that he thought the issue was, and it was actually something else. After many, many weeks, he got an appointment with Cardinal Murphy O'Connor, who accepted him, welcomed him, and when he told him what had happened, Murphy O'Connor was livid and embarrassed. And he said, I had nothing to do with that. And if I had known you were there, I would have welcomed you and welcomed Sister Christopher. His guide was an Anglican Franciscan sister. I would have welcomed her and as special guests. So the discrimination didn't come from the highest authority, but from some lieutenant who was just throwing his weight around.
It really speaks to the discrimination that in a general way that even within the church, that of women and as it showed the contextual theologies, a lot of those issues are overlap.
They overlap.
Yes. Gender issues, disability issues, cultural issues, and it almost it really has to be addressed because it's projection. Psychologically, we would say we are projecting onto someone else what we ourselves cannot deal with. And we only hope that conversations like this, of course, as you said, most people here were already, in a sense, converted. But I think the conversation still needs to happen.
Great. And in fact, I think we should really end on that note because it was the opening gambit as well, saying that this is a conversation long overdue, and you have been the most uniquely qualified because you've come from personal experience, reflection on that experience, looking at it in the light of the psychology of Carl Jung, and also the image of God theology of Elizabeth Johnson. And I would say that this has room for immense amount of expansion. And I just recommend that the little group that have gathered around you, Elizabeth, will take this beyond as we become awareness raisers of this very, very important topic. And perhaps just to end on the note of my dear friend Cyril, because he repeats it again and again. My disability is a gift from God.
It is. It's amazing. And thank you, Larry, for your insights and your questions. I'm really sorry that Mark James disappeared. Technology. Yeah.
Well, even technology suffers from disabilities.
Yes.
He was disabled. Yes. So thank you all very much for a wonderful sharing, and let us hold each other in prayer and in solidarity. Thank you, Eugene, for recording this. Thank you, Bonnie, for hosting it. And thank you, Elizabeth, once again for your brilliant presentation, and to all of you for your presence. Bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you to
Bye
Kathi
now.
for the Zoom link.
Kathi. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye now.